Well, let's talk about that and all the other big stories today with Craig, now Lord Mackinlay, a Conservative peer, who joins us. A very good afternoon to you and a Happy New Year.
And to you, Julia, good to be back.
Great to be joined by you. Well, let's talk about this this vote today. Who's playing politics? Who is the one doing the political stunts when it comes to Tory leader Kemi Badenoch pushing for this vote, tagging on this amendment to another bill? It's the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. It's got a lot of very worthwhile measures in it, which could fall because of this weird parliamentary system where if something is voted down in an amendment form at this stage, then it votes down the whole bill. I'm not quite sure how that works. Or is it the Labour Party by saying they don't want to have this bill, so they don't want to have this inquiry? And then Jess Phillips, the Home Office Safeguarding Minister, in an interview that's been broadcast today, saying nothing's off the table, including national inquiry. Who's playing politics here?
Well, yeah, obviously this is an education bill before us today. And I have to say, you've spoken quite glowing terms about it's got good stuff in it. Well, I would actually say it's got a lot of bad stuff in it. It's actually going to unwind a lot of the very, very positive changes that we've made to education over our 14 years in government, the creation of academies, trying to get local education authorities out of the system.
Oh, but in some of the safeguarding issues involved in it are good, though.
Well, yeah, I think obliquely. Now, OK, if there's safeguarding in it, then they should be adopting this ultimate safeguard of permitting a national inquiry. I've got a feeling that Labour will eventually allow this inquiry, and I think they'd be well served to accept it today, because the public are now on side with an inquiry without any doubt at all. I mean, I have to say, from my point of view, there is a stink in the air about this whole issue of grooming gangs. What were the authorities doing? What were they not doing? Was there some sort of blanket put over the whole issue of this being predominantly around men of Pakistani heritage? What was really happening up there? There was enough of a stink in the air that I think the public need to know what actually happened. Now, if I'm thinking that, I don't think I'm off of tune of what the public are thinking either. Now, what I have to say, Julia, is we often find that we reach for an inquiry. Now, look at the other inquiries that we've had over the years. The Iraq inquiry, I remember it finally reported in about 2017, I think. I remember dutifully going to collect this sort of, well, it was almost a mountain of paperwork. And quite frankly, everybody had almost forgotten about the Iraq war. We've got a COVID inquiry that's in progress at the moment. I'm quite sure by the time it reports, you won't even remember how to spell COVID, let alone anything else. So it's often used, dare I say, as a way out by the vagabond. Kick it into the long grass, let's have an inquiry.
And that wasn't actually my first thought about why we don't need another inquiry. We know what happened. Let's deal with the people who allowed it to happen. Well,
this is my point, Julia. What I would rather be seeing right now is perhaps a transposed police force from another part of the country going into those areas, a proper sort of task force being set up so that those who were potential victims of the past can actually come forward, have their say, and we can start arresting and putting into prison whoever was involved in these most foul, honestly most foul of crimes that you and I could ever read about. That's what I'd rather see happen.
I want action, but again, we need people to be able to come forward. It's got to be a safe place to come forward. We need to know that the people who are in charge of that are people who are trustworthy.
That could be put in place without an inquiry.
But the extraordinary thing is, again, virtually all of these girls, they did go to the authorities. They told the people in the care homes. They told their teachers. They told the doctor when they went into A&E for when they were pregnant again by their 50-year-old quote boyfriend. They told everyone, and no one in a position of authority did anything about it. Indeed, often the girls themselves were arrested.
Well, that's what I think the inquiry could focus on into the future, but I want to focus on what can be done for proper justice right now, because if those men and perhaps those in authority that were perhaps covering up, turning a blind eye, thinking about multiculturalism and lovely society harmony and all of those good things, doubtless those men are still out there. And doubtless a lot of those people in authority who should be acting as corporate parents to vulnerable young girls, many of which were in care, they are probably in post as well. So that's a here and now need to make sure that this is not happening again. And I've just offered you a proposal of a proper task force, transposed police officers going in, because it may be in some cases that the police locally have some questions.
I think it's very much
sure
so. Absolutely.
But I'm guessing. I'm not coming to conclusions. I have enough of a thought that there's stink in the air, that something needs to be done. And
how much of it is political then? Because when people say the Tories are playing, political stunts with this, a lot of people are saying, well, actually, there's a reason why Labour didn't want to have a full inquiry, where they don't want to now. And ministers like Jess Phillips, who I think has been very unfairly slurred by Elon Musk, which is not a rape genocide apologist, it's absurdity, but that actually people like her and many other Labour MPs, including many people in the cabinet, are very worried about losing the Muslim vote. They were worried about losing the Muslim vote. It's 80% a Labour vote, and comes often as as a sort of package vote in many local constituencies, delivered by the local imam. I've spoken to people in these areas who said this is how it works, and basically they're worried about offending people and losing those votes. We saw people turning away from Labour over Gaza. I think they lost 5 seats as a result of that. And that actually this is about politics. This is about not upsetting people who are, they believe, crucial in some key constituencies.
Yes, well, this is the shame, I think, about the way politics is going. We have a divided society rather than a united one, which we have evolved into, I thought, in this country over a very long time, where equality was king, and we've got DEI officers all over the place telling us how to be, totally even-handed. I don't think we actually need them. I think our evolution of this country has been positive towards that in every walk of life. I wondered if there are EDI officers in many of these imam camps. I'm sure I'm being somewhat facetious that there are. But you're quite right, Julie. You're saying it in graphic terms that perhaps I wouldn't go to. But the Labour Party has courted the Muslim vote over the years. That Muslim vote is now under threat because of the division in society that we've seen. And we've got a number of independent Islamic MPs now that speak just for that community in parts of the country where the Muslim vote is particularly large. And you do have to worry. I mean, I was a councillor for many years on a big unitary authority in Kent. And if one of my local constituents had come to me with one of these concerns, that their daughter had, faced this type of evil, would I have just turned a cheek? Or would I have gone, I'm afraid I'm not going to leave this. This has got to be looked into at the highest level. I'd have been on to the local police commander and everything else.
Yeah, but so that's the difference. We're sharp-elbowed.
Are some of these councillors, probably Labour over the years, I would say almost predominantly Labour, had they turned a blind eye to all this happening? So this is the longer term of what an inquiry could do. Now, we do not need new laws to tell me that raping of young girls is an illegal act.
No, exactly.
New laws
exactly. No one's arguing for that. Can I point out, by the way, that Keir Starmer is at PMQs right now. We're going to get the highlights and play those out in the next 15 minutes or so with Peter Carball. But he has urged Kemi Badenoch to withdraw her, what he calls wrecking amendment to the government's bill. He says aimed at protecting children. And he's also responded to a question from a Labour MP about whether a further inquiry is necessary or not. And the Prime Minister said he'd met with victims this morning. How convenient. And the message from them had been that they wanted action now, not the delay of a further inquiry, which I suppose echoes a lot of what you're saying there. Can I just bring you on, though? You mentioned multicultural issues and things, but it's interesting what we talked about it extensively on the show yesterday. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, had talked about, the grooming gangs and the rape gangs issue had come about because we have millions and more people in this country, and we've imported people from alien cultures, from often cultures where they have medieval attitudes towards women. There's now, calls for us to, basically stop bringing in people who have attitudes like that. Now, I've been arguing this for years. I find it extraordinary that people think it's a good idea to bring people from completely... I mean, I'm sorry, lots of countries are very backwards compared to our values in this country. And unless you're escaping those values and you want to come and live our values here in the West, we have these... I'm with Kemi Badenoch on this one. The superior culture as a Western liberal democracy. I don't believe in multiculturalism, multiracialism. Yeah, multiculturalism, absolutely not. But is it right for the party? And I know it's your party, but you don't unless you have to stand by everything now as a peer rather than MP. Is it right for us to say maybe there are people we just simply don't want to come here from certain cultures?
No, I echo everything that Robert Jenrick has said, and I'm very pleased that finally, dare I say, he is on a very, very robust track on this, because that is what the people of this country are thinking. Now, of course, Julia, you will say, well, it's my party that allowed millions of people in over the years. Yes, that is absolutely true. And that causes me great embarrassment that happened. And that's something that we need to put right. But those robust statements about some cultures really not wanting to fit in with the culture that they apparently want to join, and seem to want to make this new country that they seem to want to come to the same as the old country that they left for some reason, seems very bizarre to me. And I've never quite managed to understand that. Now, I don't want to highlight one culture over another, but, you know, there are many. I mean, the Buddhist culture, very soft, very respectful, very decent.
Well, actually, have you seen what's happened in countries with a lot of Buddhist populations? I mean, hasn't Myanmar and Sri Lanka had quite a lot of issues? They're Buddhist cultures.
Well,
there isn't any culture that's perfectly good. I mean, we talk about what Christians have done over the years. I mean, but the point is that there's living in the 21st century and sharing our values, and there isn't living in the 21st century and sharing our values.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I'm a libertarian conservative, as you know, and what people want to pray to and how they want to live indoors, well, that's a matter for them. I really don't mind at all. But in other interactions with the culture they've joined, I expect a little bit more adherence to just the values that we have.
Well, I expect a lot more adherence, personally. Now, I want to move on, because time's
I don't want to live in a bland world. I quite like, you know, a multiracial economy is fine up to its limits. But you know, I don't like blandness. But
no, there's nothing bland about believing women are equal with men or anything like that. By the way, is there someone in your? Can I just say, is there someone in your office doing some banging? There's quite a lot of background noise. I don't know if someone else in your office is.
That's probably me banging these on the desk.
Right. That's no. It's just I just worried for our listeners hearing just noises that are distracting. But can I just ask you two more things I want to ask you about very briefly, if I could, Lord Mackinlay. The cost of Britain's borrowing hit a 27-year high yesterday. It turns out that the world markets aren't very convinced by chess prodigy and apparently former economist Rachel Reeves' ability to run the economy. The cost of borrowing is now higher than it was when Liz Truss had her emergency mini budget back in 2022, which was so devastating for our economy that apparently she had to go, and so did her Chancellor. Are you concerned about borrowing hitting this high, and what it's going to mean in terms of spending cuts or tax hikes?
I am extremely concerned. I mean, this is like the start of a real pack of cards for a country, unfortunately. We still have a cost of living crisis. We do not have a dynamic economy that is growing. And yet we have interest rates that, in my view, now are far too high. Not only the Bank of England give an interest rate, that's another story. I think they've got I've got their messages wrong. But the markets upon which the government needs to draw to actually finance the growing debt is very unconvinced about the last budget and the way this economy is going. Now, that means that interest has to be paid by the government to those who are providing all that finance and debt, and that rate is now very high. Now, Rachel Reeves' dreadful budget in a few years hence gave a little bit of headroom. So there wasn't much scope for things going off track. Now, this high amount of interest payable was not in the plan, so that off-trackness is very much approaching. Now, I've got two choices on that. She either raises taxes still further and you spiral into an even more moribund economy, because I don't know any economy that grows on the back of tax. I mean, maybe there is one somewhere, but I think it's perhaps in fantasy land or Mars. The alternative is to cut spending. Now, I don't suppose she wants to do that, does she? She's just thrown another 22 billion bucket of cash at the NHS. Don't quite know what they're going to do with it. There's buckets of cash for the union paymasters. Where are we going to get the cuts from? This is coming to crunch time, because rates of interest on the 10-year gilt and especially the 30-year gilt now higher than everybody was shouting up and down on Liz Truss's, what I thought was a growth budget, actually. They're all shouting up and down, the IMF, the BBC, Bank of England, everybody, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, saying this is all dreadful and horrible. I hear them saying very much just now, but they should be.
Oh, absolutely. Just finally, really briefly, if we would, we've learned from Mark Zuckerberg that he's going to get rid of the fact checkers. It turns out fact checkers on Facebook and Instagram, just like those ones on Twitter and X, it turns out they're all very political and they're not often getting it right. You're someone who has spoken out so strongly on anti-lockdown, on COVID, on vaccine mandates, and indeed on climate change and the madness of net zero. Massive censorship on all of these different social media by supposedly the fact checkers telling us that we're wrong about all of this stuff, when actually the facts prove us right. So why are the fact checkers always coming from one political persuasion rather than any other?
Well, it's one of the reasons I was concerned about the online harms bill. It was likely to make the online giants actually become more cautious about what is printed, because they want to stay the right side of UK law. Now, I'm not sure you can ever do that with such a nebulous thing like social media and the internet, but that's a separate aside. But no, I was very welcome to hear Meta's Zuckerberg yesterday saying that he's going to reduce the number of fact checkers and all of these type of bots that are meant to keep us safe online. I don't know whether it's because it's just so huge, whether it requires so many staff and bots that they can't really cope with it. I do worry about that. So is this profitability or not? But I am very much welcome that we're going to have less of it. But you're quite right, Julia. How come it is when you've got BBC Fact Check or Verify or whatever it's called, it always seems to be on the side of the woke and the left, and all of those things that you and I fight against every day of the week.
Yeah, it's never neutral. And again, if it's not neutral, then it's not a fact check.
Well, I mean, it came to a bizarre point when I've had colleagues in the House of Commons have had their feed into YouTube actually cancelled because it's deemed, not acceptable to the bots.
That's what happened to us, exactly. And again, there was no disinformation, no misinformation. There was just discussions with medical experts. God forbid we should have done that during a pandemic, eh? Lord Craig Mackinlay, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining Conservative Peer.